All right, I think we can go ahead and get started then. Um, so my name is Anna Christ. I am a CFM and a outreach coordinator with the state of Nebraska, and I'm joined today with my colleague Erin. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, hi. As Anna said, my name is Erin Wendt. I am also an outreach coordinator here with the State of Nebraska's Floodplain Management Division. We are also joined with Elijah. He's our state NFIP coordinator here. He might hop in every so often just to add some tidbits of information we may not mention.
All right, and we are presenting today on letters of map revision. We're excited to go over this topic. We get a lot of questions about that. So for our agenda today, we are going to start off with just an introduction to all letters of map change, go over the different types and what makes them unique. We'll dig in a little deeper with letters of map revision, go into some more detail with that, and then go through the process on how to request a letter of map revision and the different requirements, and then go over some different resources and tips that are available to you. All right, so we'll get started with just some background information into letters of map change and the different types of that. So letters of map change, or LOMAC, you'll see that abbreviation quite often. They are determinations provided by FEMA that amend or revise effective floodplain maps. Now, these determinations can either revise or change the physical floodplain boundaries on the firm panel or the floodplain map, or they can just change the status of a property or structure without that physical change. Either way, these determinations require a professional survey or an engineering analysis, depending on the type of letter of map change that you're getting. You can see the photo on the right is just an example of what that determination looks like. This is a letter of map amendment. It's listed on the top right corner of the document, and it just gives some information about the property and how it's being removed from the floodplain. So these are the different types of letter of map changes. The letter of map change is really an umbrella term that describes all of these, but each of these have their own unique characteristics and qualities. So you have your letters of map amendment, or your LOMA, letters of map revision based on fill, or the LOMR F, and letters of map revision are just your LOMR. There are also conditional letters of each of these, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but these conditional letters allow FEMA a chance to comment on the development prior to start of construction. And again, it's available for each of the different letters of map change, although conditional letters of map amendments are pretty rare, but it's still an option for people to pursue. But we will talk more about that. So first we'll start off discussing letters of map amendment. So these determinations are property specific. They relate to either a portion of a property, a whole piece of the whole property, or just the structure that's on the property. These determinations are for land that is naturally higher than the base flood elevation. So the grade has not been modified at all, but the lowest adjacent grade on that property is higher than the BFE. With LOMAs, they do not change the floodplain boundaries shown on the firm. It's more of just a change in the determination. You get a letter from FEMA that states that the floodplain determination has changed, but you won't see that physical change on the firm panels. Also, with letters of map amendment, the 1 foot freeboard requirement does not apply. So Nebraska, there's a state statute that requires development in the floodplain to be elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation. That freeboard requirement doesn't apply here because it's based on the natural grade, meaning the area was inadvertently placed in the regulatory boundaries of the floodplain. So therefore, it's high enough, it doesn't meet that requirement. So with letters of map revision based on fill, these are also property-specific determinations, but it is for land that has been elevated or physically modified to be elevated above the base flood elevation. So this is for properties where they bring in fill to raise that elevation. LOMR-Fs also do not change the floodplain boundaries shown on the firm panel. Again, once you receive that determination, you won't see the physical change on the map, but there will be a letter that is provided that shows that determination change. With these, the 1 foot of freeboard requirement does still apply because it's based on that finished grade, meaning it still has to follow local and state regulations for that freeboard. There is also an extra step with letters of map revision based on fill, where they're required to get a community acknowledgement form. This form has to be signed by the floodplain administrator, and it basically just states that they are aware that fill was brought in to raise the grade on the property and that the fill was permitted correctly. It's also for the community to state that they believe everything that will be placed on the fill will be reasonably safe from flooding. Now, if you as the floodplain adopt the development placed on the fill will be reasonably safe from flooding, you don't have to sign the community acknowledgement form. That just means they won't be able to get that LOMR-F. And if they have a federally backed loan or mortgage, the mandatory purchase requirement for flood insurance will still be in place. But if they follow the elevation correctly as listed on the permits that they would get, insurance should be pretty affordable. All right, so letters of map revision. This is the only form of letter of map change that actually physically updates or refines the flood hazard information used to create the map. So you'll see changes to the flood hazard boundary map, flood insurance rate map, and flood insurance study. This type of letter of map change results in the adjustment to the height of the base flood elevation and or the boundaries of the floodplain. It's really of the flood risk, and it requires a full engineering analysis and scientific data to go through with this change. Now, you'll see the photo on the right. This is how it will appear on our interactive map. There's a blue polygon that outlines the parameters of the study, and everything within that shows how the floodplain has been revised. So where can you find letter of map changes? There's a couple different places. You can find them on the Nebraska Floodplain Interactive Map. There is a button that you can turn on that will show letter of map changes. You can see in the first photo on the left, letters of map amendment and letters of map revision based on fill will show up as a purple dot. You can click on that dot and it'll give you more information about the letter of map change. If it's a LOMA, LOMR-F, and then just more details about it. And then if it is a letter of map revision, it will show up as that blue polygon. You can also find letters of map change on FEMA's Map Service Center. So we'll kind of walk you through how to navigate that website. You can go to any search engine, type in FEMA Map Service Center or FEMA MSC, and it'll take you, you should get to this welcome page. Once you're here, towards that bottom of the image, you'll see the blue highlighted underlined search all products. You will click on that button and it will take you to the advanced search page. Here, you'll want to fill in the jurisdiction drop-down sections for your community. So you'll fill in the state, the county, and the community that you're looking into, and then you'll click on the blue search button at the bottom. It will take you to the search results page. You might have to scroll down a little bit to see this view once you get there. But once you're here, you will click on the effective products folder, and there will be some more drop-down information. And in the middle, you'll see LOMAC, so letter of map changes. Click on that. There will be some more drop-down options, and here you can see where there are letters of map revision. And then under the LOMA folder, that is where you'll find both letters of map amendments and letters of map revision based on fill. And this is where you'll find the PDF documents for all of the letters of map change. All right, so now we'll just dig a little deeper into letters of map revision, give some more details about that. So letters of map revision are needed to incorporate changes into the currently effective floodplain maps. Now, these changes can be man-made, so humans physically changing the landscape and the base flood elevation or the floodwater flows, or they could be natural, like a large flood, which alters waterways, changes what is currently seen on the firm panels, which makes them inaccurate. LOMRs, again, physically change the boundaries on the effective firm panel, and there are a few situations when they are actually required. So if there are physical changes that are made to a water course, so redirection or channelization, the developer would need to get a LOMR or apply for a LOMR. If there are physical changes being made to floodplain boundaries due to development, then a LOMR would be needed. Or if physical change has modified the base flood elevation. So this would be if a proposed development is going to cause unacceptable rise in floodwater. So greater than 1 foot of rise in a zone A or zone AE without a floodway, or any rise in a floodway, then a letter of map revision would be required. There are some situations where you can get a LOMR, but it's not technically required. So if there are any mathematical or measurement errors found on the effective firm panels, you can pursue a letter of map revision. If there's better data available to improve the firm panels, this would include topographic data, if there's survey data for an example, bridge or culverts that could change how the floodplain looks on the map, you could go pursue a letter of map revision. Or if there's improved methods or models to calculate the water surface elevations, then you can go for a letter of map revision. Why should you obtain a letter of map revision? There are a lot of benefits to them. So regulatory maps are just a single snapshot of how the floodplain looked at the time that it was made. It doesn't account for any development that occurs after they're published. So oftentimes older maps can be less reliable because it's not adapting to the landscape or development that's happening. Regulatory flood maps that are produced by our office can only be updated so fast. With typical circumstances, the process for releasing a map from the start of kickoff to when they actually become effective takes around 6 years. This timeline could be longer if we run into unexpected circumstances or if there are appeals that are made to the maps. So it can take a long time to update those maps. And right now in Nebraska, the average age of the effective regulatory maps is approximately 18 years old. Now, again, that's the average. So some of you on this call may have just recently received new maps, and some of you may have much older maps than that. So there's a wide variety, and we're working on getting everybody caught up, but it takes a long time. So by getting a letter of map revision, you can help us keep the maps updated by applying and receiving for those LOMRs when it's needed. So for conditional letters of map revision, the conditional application allows FEMA to comment on the proposed changes before the development is made. This does not officially revise the boundaries or the base flood elevation. You still have to then go back and apply for a letter of map revision. But it will indicate whether or not the project, if built as proposed, will be recognized by FEMA. So if you will get approved for that letter of map revision, it's definitely a great tool to use. There are a couple of circumstances when getting a conditional letter before applying for the official letter is required. And that is if a project is expected to cause more than 1 foot of rise in the base flood elevation in a zone A or a zone AE without a floodway, or if the project is in the floodway and is expected to cause any rise in the base flood elevation. And you can see where the CFR regulation stating that requirement is listed on the right of the screen. We do, however, just recommend developers of any large-scale proposals obtain a conditional letter of map revision just to ensure that the project will actually achieve the intended outcome. It doesn't hurt to be absolutely sure before you put a whole bunch of time and money into a project. Now, with the conditional letters of map revision, building permits cannot be issued solely based on the conditional letter. It's not based off of FEMA's approval of the conditional letter. The applicant still needs to go through the local authority, so the floodplain administrator or the local community, when proposing development. And when you're submitting a letter of map revision and you move forward with the project, the formal letter of map revision request must be submitted within 6 months of the project completion in order to stay compliant with the permit that is provided. All right, I think this is where Erin will be taking over.
Yes, I will be picking up from here to the end of the presentation. So we're just going to go even further in depth with the letter of map revision process. So on the next slide. So the request process for a letter of map revision it's quite intensive. So first of all, it has to be requested through the community CEO or the chief elected officials, so the mayor or the board chairperson. And the community is also responsible for adopting those revised flood hazard maps or flood hazard information once the map revision is effective. If multiple communities are affected by the letter of map revision, they have to be included in this request process that is outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations that all impacted communities have to be involved in the process. Letter of map revision data, it has to be certified by a registered professional engineer that is licensed to practice in the state the community is requesting that LOMR from. And like Anna made note, LOMRs have to be requested The language specifically states as soon as practicable, but no later than 6 months after the date such information becomes available. So letters of map revision within 6 months have to be applied for after project completion to account for those changes. All right, on the next slide here. So we'll just talk a little bit more about the data that is required for a letter of map revision. There are some really good fact sheets and information throughout FEMA's website and such. I found this particular one from Illinois, but it is a FEMA map revision fact sheet. There are also instructions specific to map revision forms that are a great place to look as well. But some of the data that is required for letter of map revisions include obviously the application and certificate forms. So the forms that are required in the application are going to vary depending on the type of project, and we'll go more in depth on that in a couple of slides. And then, of course, there are payment fees associated with letters of map revision, and so those forms and payments have to be submitted as well to FEMA. There's also that community acknowledgement form. So any of the impacted communities within the reaches of a letter of map revision have to sign off on a community acknowledgement form just to ensure that they have been involved in the map revision process. And then there's the actual engineering data. So there's the hydrologic computations that are required, as well as the computer models that are used for that. So it also has to be the FEMA approved version of the hydrologic computer models. And then the hydraulic analyses as well have to be submitted. Those are going to include things such as what's called a duplicate effective model, a corrected effective model, the existing conditions, and the revised post-project model. This is all very engineer specific, but it's good to keep in mind just to know what's required. On the next slide, there's a few more pieces there. So other pieces of data that are required include a certified topographic work map, and that work map has to show the special flood hazard area and the floodway, if your community has a floodway, and those delineations of those boundaries. Again, it has to be certified by a licensed professional engineer. And it needs to show, this work map has to show the current effective floodplain delineations as well as the revised delineations. There also has to be an annotated firm panel. So this firm panel will have the revised delineations included on the current effective firm to show the tie-ins. So letters of map revision kind of have to fit in like a puzzle piece, as Elijah has described it in the past. So the revised portions have to make sense and fit in with the rest of the effective map. If a flood insurance study report is available for the area, that also has to be annotated with the new data and information. And lastly, of course, there has to be a project narrative and site photographs. All right, there are some regulatory requirements when it comes to letters of map revision. These are usually like the notification to property owners is usually required typically only in the conditional form, but we still highly recommend it for just standard letters of map revision. But notification to property owners that are impacted by increased flood hazards because of the letter of map revision have to be notified. And then public notice of any floodway change has to follow regulations outlined in Part 65.7 of the Code of Federal Regulations. And there's a lot of information there. So if you are currently kind of going through that LOMR process or are interested in pursuing it, I definitely recommend taking a peek at the regulatory language in the Code of Federal Regulations. All right, talking even further about the submittal documents for letters of map revision. So that, again, is going to include things such as the completed application forms, narratives on the project and submittal, any hydrologic computations along with those computer models and the digital files, any hydraulic computations with those digital files as well. And of course, that certified topographic map showing the floodplain and floodway delineations. Other submittal documents are going to include, again, that annotated firm panel or flood boundary floodway map to reflect the changes that the project is causing. Any as-built plans or surveys need to be submitted if it is for a letter of map revision, or the design plans have to be submitted if it is for a conditional letter. For all hydraulic structures or grading with the within the floodplain along each revised reach. Any other items required to satisfy the FEMA NFIP regulatory requirements, any review fees, and then Endangered Species Act compliance has to be shown that, you know, the project is in compliance with that. I do see we have a couple questions in the chat, so we'll pause real quick to check that out. So the first question here I see is, if you have no floodplain in the city limits and want to do infill housing projects, does a LOMR need to be done, or is it only in a floodplain area? So when it comes to letters of map revision, that is only in areas that have floodplain or special flood hazard areas. So for this particular question, a letter of map revision is not required. The other question we see here is who starts the application overview and concurrence form? So the overview and concurrence form, I believe, is going to include the community has to be involved in filling some of that out, such as like the acknowledgement of the community and such. And then the engineer on staff that helps put together the package also has to be involved in that overview description. Okay. Next slide here. I guess I was a little ahead on answering one of those questions, but the overview and concurrence form is one of the forms that is required for a letter of map revision. It's just going to, the overview and concurrence form, again, is going to outline the project, such as, you know, it'll include the project narrative, the communities that are involved in the LOMR, and then their concurrence, which is saying that they've been involved in the process. The other forms listed on the screen here are going to be, it's going to be dependent on the type of project and the type of letter of map revision that is being applied for, whether or not that form is needed. So form 2 is going to be just the riverine hydrology and hydraulics form. Form 3 is riverine structures. So if there are any structures that are being put in place that are going to adjust the floodplain boundaries or heights, that would be form 3. Forms 4 and 5 are specific to coastal communities. So here in Nebraska, you're probably never going to come across those coastal forms. And then form 6 is specific to alluvial fan flooding, which again, I don't think is super common here in Nebraska. So you may not have to come across that much. And again, these are all going to be very specific to engineers completing them. So even as floodplain administrators, you're probably not going to be too involved in this form completion other than like the overview. There is instructions and guidance available for all of the forms listed on the screen here from FEMA. They have their MT2 request guidance and instructions. I've included a screenshot of what that cover page looks like for that document. But again, these forms have to be completed by a registered professional engineer, the applicant, so the communities, the applicant, which is often the communities as well, and any of the other affected communities that are within the reaches of the revised portion. Okay, I see a few more questions in the chat here. Why would a project be allowed to be built before any of the calculations or results from the application have been approved by FEMA? So that comes down to the local communities like process and such. So again, like we said, conditional letters of map revision do not provide approval on a project to go forward. That is the local community's responsibility to approve of projects to start. So that's the local community thing, and conditional letters are just to allow FEMA to provide comments on the project if the project proponent or the developer are confident in their studies and work, and they know that letter of map revision is going to be approved for in the future. They don't have to get that conditional. We always recommend getting a conditional, but conditional letters aren't the required portion. It's the final letter of map revision that's required.
Aaron, do you mind if I add real quick to that?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah. No, so Aaron's exactly right. I mean, what you have to think about is the letter of map revision, the actual changes to the firm are going to be based on as-built information. So once the project is completed, and because they haven't changed the floodplain maps during the development process, every part of that development has to be compliant with your floodplain regulations. So they are still having to get floodplain development permits and meet your minimum standards throughout the duration of the project. And then once they've completed the project, then they are submitting the as-built information as part of a LOMR package to change the maps based on what they've done. Now, if you as a community are uncomfortable with permitting something on the basis that they will provide a final map revision upon completion of the project, then that's where the CLOMR comes in, the conditional, because they are basing the proposal, the proposed plans, and creating a map revision for FEMA's comments based on their proposed plans. That way you can see things in advance and look for FEMA's comments on that on the front end. They are still then required to get the map revision upon project completion. Does that make sense? If that doesn't answer your question, let me know.
Okay, thank you, Elijah. Going back to the presentation, yeah, this is just a quote I pulled from the MT2 forms instruction, and it's just outlining again all of the required information and process to get a letter of map revision to change the effective flood insurance study information with the map revised information. So again, the requester of the LOMR has to provide all of the data used in revising the floodplain boundaries, so all of those duplicate and revised models. They have to provide all of the data necessary to demonstrate that the physical modifications to the floodplain are going to meet NFIP regulations as well as endangered species compliance, and that they have been designed to the 1% annual chance flood event or the typical regulatory flood zones and will be adequately maintained. And then, of course, they have to demonstrate that the revised information is consistent with the effective information. So again, the revised information has to fit in with the effective information, kind of like a puzzle piece. It has to flow and make sense. It can't be just a big abrupt change. It has to fit in. Okay. Moving right along, we've got a little bit of information about the timeline you're looking at with a letter of map revision. So the initial review will come from that first submittal for a conditional letter or a final letter of map revision. Typically within 30 days, FEMA will send comments back to the applicant, or they might request additional information within that window of time. So it's important to ask yourself, or the applicant needs to ask themselves, has enough data been submitted to complete a detailed review? Have all the fees been provided? Have all the application forms and supporting documentation been provided? Things like that, just keep that in mind. If additional information is requested from FEMA, they'll have an additional 30 days after that additional information is provided to them to then review and provide comments on that additional information, or they can request even more data if they still feel they don't have enough to complete a full detailed review. And this process can repeat until all of the submittal requirements are fulfilled. Then once all of the information has been provided to FEMA and they can conduct their full detailed review, a notification will be sent to the community within 90 days of receiving that full submittal package on their determination. If any hydrology reviews are required of FEMA, it is recommended that that is submitted to them with at least 6 weeks for review. And again, this is in areas that the hydrology is going to change, just because there's going to be that more in-depth engineering review required for hydrology purposes. All right, so once a letter of map revision has been approved by FEMA, the community will get a letter that shows that determination, and included in that is going to be a cover letter, and that's going to be addressed to the CEO of the community. All of the communities involved in the LOMR process that are affected by this will get a letter. And this cover letter is going to include the case number for the map revision, the issuance date, the effective date, and the list of attachments within the packet. And those are going to be things such as the determination document. And that determination document, again, is going to have the issuance date of the letter and the effective date of the map revision. It's going to include information about the revised firm panel or multiple panels if more than one is affected, and the flooding sources that are revised. It's going to include information on the nature of the revision, so whether it was a physical project that was implemented or if it was a study based on just getting more detailed data. It'll include information about the revised reach of each flooding source, the flood hazard changes, so whether it's changes to the boundaries of the floodplain, the heights of the base flood elevations, or changes to the floodway. It'll discuss relevant portions of NFIP regulations within those revised reaches. And then there'll also be contact information for FEMA representatives and a public notice or newspaper publication dates for those regulatory requirements. So as we discussed earlier, there's different types of letters of map changes, and there's also different types of letters of map revision under that too. So there are conditional letters or full letters of map revision based on either new hydrology in the area, or if there are bridge, culvert, or channel changes, or a combination of that. There are also conditional letters or final letters based on levees, berms, or other structural flood protection measures. That's a separate type of map revision. Then there are obviously map revisions based on that as-built information submitted as a follow-up to a conditional letter of map revision. So this is that instance where a project got that conditional letter and then they would submit that data for the final map revision. And then lastly, there is a map revision based solely on the submission of more detailed data being available. So in general, the map change review status has a few different phases. And this table just shows those phases and a description of that phase. So it'll start with, FEMA has received the map change request, and then they'll check it for completion. So they'll just be ensuring that all of the data required has been received. Then it will move to being under review. So that will be when The technical data and supporting documentation for that map change is being reviewed. If they are requesting additional data or fees in support of that request, it will be under that awaiting data / fee status. Once the reviews have been completed, we go into the different letter sent statuses. So there'll be that effective date, so that the letter of map change will, that letter will have the effective date of the map change, and any NFIP regulations will apply there. There'll be a comment period for certain letters of map changes that will be open for approximately 30 days, and any comments have to be backed by scientific and legal data. There'll also be, after that comment period, there'll be an appeals period, which again has to be backed by scientific or technical data, and that appeals period is typically 90 days. And then another status that could be seen is being dropped. So if additional data or fee was not received within the regulatory timeframe, processing of that case would be suspended. Now, with letters of map revision and conditional letters of map revision, there are fees associated with changing the maps and reviewing that data. And the fees are going to vary depending on the type of letter of map change. So whether it's based on that new hydrology or levee or berm construction, the fees are going to vary. So as you can see on the screen, it can be quite costly, but these map changes are necessary in certain instances to get that effective data up to date. And these fees will, Elijah, correct me if I'm wrong, the fees would be the responsibility of the developer or the project proponent to cover?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter who is making that,
Okay.
paying that fee. It just would really come down to whoever is applying for it. If the community is applying for it just on their own, of course, it'd be a fee that they would have to pay. If it's an applicant that's applying for it, that's not, it's a private applicant, not part of the community. The community is just involved to the extent that they are acknowledging this submittal, then obviously the community shouldn't be expected to pay that fee. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter who pays that fee. If there is a discussion about it between the community and the private applicant, that's totally fine, just as long as the fee is paid.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that brings us to our last section here. We'll round off just talking about the various resources and some other tips and information that can help you in this process if you ever have to go through it. First things first, some resources we have. So we highly recommend our interactive map. Again, that's going to show any of the effective letters of map change. You can also find letters of map change on FEMA's Map Service Center. And then FEMA has a lot of resources on their website regarding letters of map change. So again, I would recommend checking those out. And then we also have a bunch of information on our other pages. So on the next slide, we've got a link to our digital desk reference, which again has a bunch of resources that are going to help you as the floodplain administrator. We always are going to recommend our trainings and workshop page where these recorded trainings can be found, or where registration links can be if you want to attend our classes live. And then of course, just our division itself. Our floodplain management division can provide any sort of technical assistance that you are requesting related to floodplain management. We have engineers on our staff too that can help review any sort of engineering data you might have questions on. So I provided a link to our contact page there. So if you have any questions, just contact any of us on the floodplain management team and we can help you out. Just to highlight our upcoming trainings, our next 2 virtual classes are on March 26th and April 16th. That's going to be floodplain management scenarios and having difficult conversations, as well as how to get your board on board. And then I also want to highlight, we are having our annual floodplain conference at the end of April. It is an in-person 2-day conference here at our Fallbrook office. Registration links and additional information for all of these trainings can be found on our trainings and workshops page. All right, lastly, just want to plug our social media. We post a bunch of fun information there, as well as reminders of when these classes are taking place, as well as our recorded trainings will be on our YouTube page. So these are all of the social media pages we can be found on. And that brings us to the end of the content for this class. This is some of our contact information for the outreach side of the division. Feel free to reach out to any of us there.